Podcasting from Dallas, Texas. I am Shireen, and this is the Yumlish podcast. Yumlish is working to empower you to take charge of your health through diet and exercise and reduce the risk of chronic conditions like type 2 diabetes and heart disease. Through amplifying the voices of healthcare professionals, educators, and communities, we hope to share a unique perspective and a culturally relevant approach to managing these chronic conditions with you each week. Have you ever wondered what terms like natural, free range, cage-free, no sugar added really mean? Well, on this episode, we talked to Dr. Ernest Baskin, who walks us through these terms and really empowers us to make better decisions the next time we're grocery shopping or at a restaurant. Dr. Ernest Baskin is an assistant professor of food marketing and general pack fellow at the Haas School of Business at St. Joseph's University. He researches consumer behavior in the food domain. Welcome, Dr. Baskin.
Thank you, Shireen, for having me.
An absolute pleasure. So diving in, the very first thing I want to ask you is what really sparked your interest in consumer behavior and marketing research?
So in grad school, I became interested in how people make decisions and how the environment affects those decisions. So I did a lot of work in thinking about when people go out to eat or when they go to a grocery store, what do they wind up buying and how does the layout of that store affect their choices? How does that affect their meals, etc.? And I think that really inspired me to look deeper to motivate people to make choices that are better for them.
And so how does your research translate to how we as consumers interact with that world?
Yeah, so what we as consumers don't really think about is that our world very much influences the choices that we make. So for instance, I did some research with Google where we looked at the structure of their micro kitchens, and it turns out that in areas where sodas are closer to unhealthy snacks, people were eating more of the unhealthy snacks than in areas where the sodas and the coffees were further from the unhealthy snacks. And so we as consumers don't tend to realize the extent to which our world really affects the choices we make. And I think that's part of what really inspires me in my research to really point out these parts of the world where we're not aware of the way it impacts us, but it definitely does.
And so how can we utilize this research that you've done to make better, healthier decisions for our health, especially for those that are living with chronic illnesses?
Yeah, so I think that we really need to think about the way in which we structure our everyday lives. So generally, we don't spend a lot of time on the choices we make. If you just think about going to a grocery store, nobody spends 4 hours at a grocery store making a decision about each and every product on the store shelves. So they make these very quick decisions. And then when they get home, they again make these very quick decisions about what it is they're going to eat. So what I think about and what this field of research is called nudge theory is how do we structure our environment so that the choices that are easiest to make are the ones that are most impactful to us and the ones that make our health better, right? So if you're struggling to eat healthier, for instance, you want to make sure that products that you want to eat are the ones that are in the front of your refrigerator rather than the back of the refrigerator. You want to make sure they're not obscured by anything else. You want to make sure that your environment is configured in such a way that it's extremely easy to make the choices that you want. Do we do this on a regular basis? I think most of us don't. I think most of us don't pay attention. We put everything everywhere and we don't really take the time to structure our environment to in service of our goals. And I think that if we do, I think that will help us keep those goals much easier.
So you mentioned nudge theory. I want to understand that a little better. And also I want to clarify, is the goal then, Dr. Baskin, to make the healthier choice, the easier choice? Is that what we're going for? Is that convenience?
Yeah, I think so. I think the goal is to make the easier choice, the healthier choice, the easier choice, because in many cases where what the research calls cognitive misers, so we tend to not expend a lot of our mental energy on the choices that we make. So because we know that about humans, we know that they don't expend a lot of energy on thinking about their choices. We want to make sure that the effortless choices are also the choices that are good for us. And we can see the opposite of that in many arenas. So for instance, if you go to the supermarket and you look at the checkout line, all of the checkout line is filled with various candies. And in that case, you have the impulse buy, the easier choice, and it's set up in such a way that the easier choice is maybe not the best for you to be eating all the time, but it's there and you can easily pick it up. Whereas some of the other choices that might be better for you are strewn kind of throughout the store, and you might need to look more deeply for them. And so, much like the store can change what you buy based on its layout, you yourself can also create a nudge by structuring your kitchen and your pantry to focus on specific products and specific meals that are going to be in service of the diet you're trying to keep, and that are going to be preventative for the chronic illness that you're living with.
And so is that what nudge theory is?
So nudge theory is more general. Nudge theory is talking about, in general, how can we affect people's choice? And it's been applied to a number of domains. So healthy eating is just one domain. A domain that's of interest right now is vaccination uptake. So I've done some research on vaccination uptake. A couple of others have done vaccination uptake experiments. Basically, what are some low-cost ways to structure the environment to get people to elect to vaccinate themselves? My research focused on essentially making it look like the vaccination center was convenient to you by showing a map in the initial email that told you that a vaccination was available. And in my research, it shows that even if the map is included in a link that you click in the email, just having the map in the body of the email was enough to get a statistically significant percentage of people to get their flu vaccination in my case. But a very similar thing could apply to the COVID vaccine, the COVID-19 vaccine. You just want to make sure that it is as convenient as possible for folks to take it, and you want to communicate that convenience. And structuring the environment to communicate that convenience becomes critically important.
And I like that you mentioned where I believe you use the term cognitive misers, right? So we just want the information given to us on a steel plate. You don't want to think much about it. You just want to make it as easy as possible to sort of digest that information.
Exactly.
So how is food marketing and adjectives use impacting our experience as consumers? And is there anything we should look out for there?
Yeah, so labeling has been a very interesting research area for me. And so one of the past research projects that I've been working on has been, how do labels, which you're not really sure of, how do they affect your perceptions of products? So for instance, right now in foodie culture, we see a lot of restaurants and a lot of manufacturers in the retail space basically creating really weird names for their products. So if you go into a restaurant and you see awakened broccoli, I have no idea what awakened broccoli is. And I think many listeners probably also have no idea what awakened broccoli is. However, the restaurant that puts awakened broccoli on its menu is trying to signal something. And what I found in my research is they may not be getting the message across that they think they're getting across. I found out that if people see that there's a word that they don't understand, they obviously know that they're supposed to understand it. They obviously know that it means something, and so they try to predict what it means. And so generally, a couple of things happen. People wind up thinking that when a product has a word that they don't know what it means, it's less prototypical of its category. So an awakened broccoli is not a normal broccoli. It's an uncommon type of broccoli all of a sudden. And so what happens when you view an uncommon food item? All of a sudden, you think that it's likely to be more expensive because it is uncommon. And the other thing that you think about is you're likely going to enjoy it less. You predict that you're likely going to enjoy it less, so you're less likely to maybe go to that restaurant or buy that product. And the reason why we think that is likely because people generally don't like taking risks in the domain of food, and people generally view themselves as having more conventional taste. They don't see themselves as unconventional, and so products that are less prototypical probably are not going to fit their taste. And so that becomes problematic, particularly if those adjectives are trying to signal that the product is healthy, that it's a better for you product. Because as soon as there's an adjective that you don't know, all of a sudden your prediction says, maybe I'm less likely to enjoy it, and so I'm likely not going to buy it, even if that may be kind of good for me in the long run.
So what can consumers do? So if they come across such adjectives, I guess what can they do on their part to understand the health, the nutritious value, what it means, what that adjective specifically means, and if it's sort of meeting their goals or not?
Yeah, so I'm a big proponent of consumer education. So I think that if consumers don't really understand what something means, rather than assume you know what something means, you should really take the time time to look it up. And there's been some movement on the part of manufacturers in the food space to give you more information. So on the back of certain packages, you'll find QR codes, which allow you to dig deeper into what some of the ingredients are, how a product was made, etc. And you can find a much deeper dive into all of the information that's on a packaging, often at the company website for a lot of processed food products. And so, yes, this is really hard to do for an entire grocery store of items, but for the product categories which matter most to you, that you're spending a good portion of your food budget on, I think it makes a lot of sense for folks to, at least at the beginning when they're trying that food product, to look up information on how it's made, what those adjectives mean, how they're derived, that they might not necessarily know.
You know, we polled our audience, our Yumlish audience on social media, and they wanted to know about a few labels that are seen on popular products. My biggest one that I go to is when shopping for eggs. Boy, do they make it hard to try to decipher. You know, it's incredibly hard looking at organic and if it has that organic seal on it, because I know, you know, there's certain claims that are made, and then you've got the pasteurized stuff, got, you know, ultra, I don't even know what half of these terms mean. So Dr. Baskin, walk us through what all of these different terms mean when we're shopping for eggs, you know, for dairy even. Can you walk us through some of those?
Yeah, sure. So this is one of those things where the FDA generally regulates all of these terms, and it's important as a consumer to know how strongly each of these terms is regulated versus not regulated. So for instance, if it's labeled organic, that is a very strongly regulated term. So there is a list of procedures that a farm has to follow if it can get the USDA organic seal. And so if you see something that has a USDA organic seal, it's been third-party verified, and you can be confident that it is organic. Now, one of the things that you have to keep in mind, though, is organic makes absolutely no claims about health, right? So just because something is organic does not necessarily mean it is healthier. It might be, but it's not necessarily a one-to-one correlation. So one of the things that's important if you're going to spend the extra money for organic, because obviously the yield on organic produce and dairy is lower, and so companies charge higher for organic products because it costs them more to make them. So it's important if you're buying those products for a premium that you go and you look up all the standards that an organic farm has to follow, and you ask yourself, are these standards something I value? Am I willing to pay more for them? And if they're not, then you don't pay more. But if you are, then you do. And I think that a lot of folks tend to equate health and organic, and that's not the case. And the other thing that's very, very common that you see out in the world is you see the natural labeling. And so the natural labeling is almost the opposite, because natural is not third-party regulated at all. So there's no inspector that comes in and says, okay, is this natural or not, right? So the USDA goes and checks organic, but nobody comes in and checks what is natural. So the FDA basically has a loose definition of what natural is. So it's basically nothing is artificial or synthetic in the product, and nothing is added that you wouldn't normally expect to add it. Now, let's think about what that doesn't include. So it doesn't really include any kind of production methods. So while a term like organic, it has in the list that you can't use pesticides you can't use artificial pesticides. A term like natural doesn't explicitly prohibit that. You may not be using pesticides, but it's completely up to you. It's not that natural in and of itself prohibits from using it. So it's not intended to address food production methods. So for instance, things like pesticides, pasteurization, irradiation, things like that. So it's not intended to address any of those. Another thing that folks often talk about is GMOs. So will a natural product be GMO free or not? Well, we don't know. It may or may not be. Again, because this is it's considered kind of manufacturing, natural doesn't really address whether a product is a GMO or not. So it's really important when you think about these types of labels to think about what actually is regulated and what isn't. So organic, there's a complete list. You can check that list, and it's a fairly broad list, and it's very, very specific. You may want it to go further, And there are labels by third parties that are even stricter than organic, because some organizations believe that maybe even organic doesn't go far enough. But natural, on the other hand, isn't specifically regulated on a couple of things that when you ask people, they think it's regulated under.
Another one that I want to ask you about quickly is free range and cage free.
Yeah, so that's another good one. So free range, I think, it is regulated. So you have to, so for instance, if you buy free range chicken, for instance, those chickens had to have access to the outside, but it is less broad than you might think. So for instance, they could have all they need to do is they need to have the ability to go outside. And for many chickens, they can either go outside where the weather maybe is not so nice, or they can stay inside in their climate controlled area, which is very nice. And so for a lot of cases, when you see free range, unless there's some other terminology or some other description, you don't really know how much time that chicken has spent outside, because the actual usage of the word free range doesn't require a specific amount of time that the chicken has spent outside, only that they had the ability to go outside. And it doesn't require that the chicken even choose to go outside, only that they had the ability to do so.
So does that mean cage free is better?
So I hesitate to say that anything is better or worse, because I don't necessarily think that anything is better or worse. It's a matter of what you are willing to pay for. So certain things are more expensive than others, right? So certain things lower the production ability of the farm. And when you lower the production ability of the farm, the cost per individual egg for that farm increases, right? And so if you give animals the ability to go outside, potentially, you're going to increase costs, right? All of a sudden, it becomes not a sealed environment anymore. If you remove cages, you have to worry about animals interacting with each other, and sometimes they can get into fights. And so that's no good either. So all of these things increase costs. And so the one thing that I would recommend to consumers, again, is education is so important, because a lot of times when we go to the store and we see all of these labels, we automatically assume that they're all positive and we should buy them really regardless. But what we really should be thinking about is, what is this label conveying? What does the manufacturer have to do to get that label? And are we willing to pay a price premium for that specific label?
Another one that I want to ask you about is when cereals claim to lower cholesterol.
Yeah, so I think the big example here is Cheerios, which has a huge can lower cholesterol banner on the front of their package. And there, I think it's important to look at the documentation for how they got the can lower cholesterol banner. And so what they say is they have a clinical study which says that if you eat Cheerios, you can lower your correct cholesterol. But the important part of that clinical study is that clinical study was as part of a balanced diet. So it's really important to note that if you just eat Cheerios and nothing else, you're going to have lower cholesterol. Is that true? No. If you eat Cheerios and then a bunch of junk food, is that going to help you? Probably not either. But we know that, whole grains are good, right? And if you eat Cheerios as part of a general balanced diet and as part of a general healthy diet, that's good for you. And so that's what they tested. And it's very, very important to know that that's kind of the evidence for the claim. It's a specific food is not a cure-all. I don't believe that any kind of food can be a cure-all. I believe in kind of a lot of things in moderation, because no one thing is going to be the cure-all. And similarly, Cheerios, can help. It can lower cholesterol, but it's not a cure-all where if you just eat Cheerios, magically you're going to lower your cholesterol. That's just not true. It has to be within the context of a general healthy diet.
The last one I want to ask you about is no added sugar.
Yeah, so no added sugar is, I think, another great one. And you see that pretty commonly in a lot of juice drinks, I think. And the reason why manufacturers add no added sugar is because we look at that and say, oh, that's great. I'm not adding any sugar to my diet. Amazing. The thing to keep in mind with no added sugar is that no added sugar is a labeling that speaks for itself. We, the manufacturer, have not added any sugar to the product. What that doesn't mean is there is no sugar in in the product, because that is a different label. That is a zero sugar label. And particularly in juices are a rich source of natural sugars. They have a lot of sugars in of themselves. So if you look at the nutritional labeling on a bottle of apple juice, for instance, you will see that it has just as much sugar as a bottle of soda. Although in the case of fruit juice, it is natural sugars. In the case of a bottle of soda, it may be added sugars. It is unclear the extent to which natural sugars are going to be better than the added sugars, actually. You should probably keep your sugar consumption down kind of across the board. But I think it's important to note that just switching from soda to fruit juice is not a cure-all, because fruit juice comes with its own sugar. And so what we've seen is that part of what's helpful from a consumption standpoint is if you eat actual fruit. When you eat actual fruit, you get that fruit sugar, but you also get it with fiber, so you don't wind up consuming as much of the fruit sugar, and it takes a lot longer to digest, and you feel fuller rather than when you consume the fruit sugar as fruit juice. It's sort of just kind of directly, you get sugar directly, and it processes much quicker.
I feel like there are a bunch of different adjectives and claims that I can ask you about further, but with that, we're toward the end of the episode, Dr. Baskin. At this point, I'd love for our listeners to learn more about how they can connect with you and just learn more about your work.
Sure, yeah. So you can connect with me on Twitter. I am at Ernest Baskin, and also on LinkedIn. If you'd like to see any of my previous published work, you are welcome to look on Google Scholar and search by Ernest Baskin, and you can see all of my published work. And in general, feel free to email me. I'm happy to chat with folks. Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah.
Okay, great. So with that, Dr. Baskin, thank you so very much for your time. This was very interesting for us to learn about all these different labels, what they really mean, and how we as consumers really need to educate and inform ourselves. And don't be afraid to whip out your phone and start Googling things if you don't understand them. So I think this is very empowering. So we really appreciate your time.
Absolutely. And thank you so much.
And to all those of you who tuned in, find us on Instagram at Yumlish_. All of the labels that we talked about today, the lowers cholesterol, the added sugars, have you seen any of these labels on products? Does this episode change your mind and help you view those products any different? Head over to our Instagram and answer that poll there. And with that, we'll see you on the next one. Thank you for listening to the Yumlish podcast. Make sure to follow us on social media at Yumlish_ on Instagram and Twitter, and at Yumlish on Facebook and LinkedIn for tips about managing your diabetes or other chronic conditions. You can also visit our website, yumlish.com, for even more information and to get involved with all of the exciting opportunities Yumlish has to offer. All of the links are in the show notes below, so please don't hesitate to check us out. If you like this week's show, make sure to subscribe to the Yumlish podcast, give us a like, comment, or a 5-star review, and share us with a friend. This is Shireen signing off. Thank you again, and we'll see you next time. Remember, your health always comes first. Stay well.